All right, everyone, we're going to get started on the last presentation for today. And I know this is a Web Components week, and we're just now getting to Web Components, but I hope that we were able to build a good foundation today and kind of think about componentization at a higher level and sort of how we've done it without Web Components, because we certainly have, right? We've built these whole libraries, things like jQuery UI and Bootstrap, and things work, but they don't work perfectly. If you noticed adding in your component already, you probably noticed the bleeding styles. That's like one of the big problems that Web Components is seeking to solve. So the best definition of what Web Components are comes from the Polymer project. I'm going to zoom in here. Or not. All right. Web Components usher in a new era of web development based on encapsulated and interoperable custom elements that extend HTML itself. I think the key point here is encapsulated and interoperable. Custom elements is part of that, but we'll talk more about that. That's not the only part. And then extend HTML. That's what Web Components are doing. They're extending the existing APIs to give us a new level of flexibility that we haven't had before. Polymer is a library that's built on top of a lot of Web Components technologies, and the bootcamp next week is all about Polymer. So I'm not going to touch Polymer at all this week. I'm going to let the bootcamp training next week handle that. But it builds on all the principles that we'll talk about this week and all the technologies that we'll talk about. There are 4 pieces of Web Components. Web Components are not one big thing. Just like when we talk about HTML5, we talk about HTML5 as not being one thing. It's a collection of different technologies. Web Components is the same way. Web Components is a collection of 4 different technologies. These are Shadow DOM, custom elements, HTML templates, and HTML imports. All of these together equal Web Components. But they can all be used on their own. They all work independently. So the road to Web Components. What was the journey like? Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was difficult, but it was definitely a journey. So in 2011, and these are all linked, and they're very interesting to read some of these links, so I definitely suggest taking a look. In 2011, we had the first draft of the Shadow DOM spec, and it was this proposal for scoping CSS and HTML DOM elements. In 2011, we also had start discussion on the component model, and it was this idea of a component model on the web was driven in particular by a desire to make a web that was less hostile to these applications that we were seeing people build, especially mobile applications that were being built in the context of the web browser. In 2012, we got the first Web Components working draft. Working draft is one of these stages of a proposal on the W3C standards body for pushing proposals through as becoming part of the web spec. In 2013, we got Mozilla Xtags, which was one of the first libraries and polyfills built around Web Components. And also around that same time, we got Google's Polymer. So again, I won't be talking a lot about Polymer this week, but it was an important part of this road to Web Components. It was an important part of the process. And together, they, both Xtags and Polymer, were able to introduce the polyfill that we'll talk about later that allows us to use Web Component features on non-Web Components browsers. And then in spring 2014, Chrome started supporting Web Components, Shadow DOM, and HTML imports. Since then, so I believe they had custom element support before that. They've also had template support for a while. But Chrome was the first to really support Shadow DOM and HTML imports, and is in fact the only browser that still supports Shadow DOM and HTML imports, as well as custom elements. And so that was a really important milestone, because while things move very quickly in the web, standards don't move that quickly. And so from 2011 to 2014, or really from 2012, where we got the first working draft, to 2014, is a pretty short period of time to start seeing Web Components working in a production browser, which was particularly exciting, but also I think says something about Chrome's and Google's desire to see Web Components in the wild. And so things moved very quickly. And the fact that by mid last year, and we're almost at a year at this point, where we've had web component support in the browser is huge. All right, so what are these 4 pieces? We're going to dive into each of these deep throughout the week. There are a whole bunch of nuances to each of them, but let's just go in at a high level. Shadow DOM is the first one, and I think probably the most interesting. So Shadow DOM gives us scoping and encapsulation for CSS and HTML that was previously completely impossible. And the key here is create shadow root. That's the key function that's called on an element to add a shadow DOM node to that element. One of the things when I say previously only possible in browser elements, this was actually something that has been used by browser vendors, particularly Chrome, to represent custom elements or built-in elements in HTML in the browser. I'm going to do a quick demo of this. So let's see. So I'll go ahead and create an HTML video element. I think I need to give it a height and width there. Cool. Apparently, Firefox doesn't show anything by default, so. All right. How many of you use the HTML5 video element? Okay, a few. It's one of those kind of really cool elements we got with HTML5. And you have the video up here, and you have these controls if you put the controls attribute on. And it's kind of nice. You don't need to use like the old school Flash players or some custom JavaScript library to play videos. You can just go ahead and put a source in your video element, and you get video on the page. Actually, YouTube's been using it for a while. And it's great because it's cross-browser and cross-device. So things like Flash aren't supported on iOS devices. So that's what really pushed this ahead. And so the video element is one big element. If I look at this in source here, there we go. It's just one element, right? Like we have open tag video, close tag video, and our attributes. And I see it as one big square here. So that's cool. But I mean, I'm looking at this, and I see a whole bunch of other things going on. Like I see a button down here, a play button, and we have a little time code. And we have this little progress bar here, and another button. You maybe just assume, well, that's how the browser does it, right? Like, we don't get to know about any of this. But you know, it'd be kind of cool if we did, if we knew how this was implemented. So I can actually go in Chrome here, and I can go to my options in my Chrome DevTools. They always move it, so see if I can find it. There we go. Show user agent Shadow DOM. That Shadow DOM. User agent means the browser. That means is the actual client. And then Shadow DOM is one of these pieces of web components. So if I select that box and I come back over here and I close my options, suddenly video is not just one big thing anymore. So we have our video, but we also have this thing called shadow root. Ooh, there we go. We also have this thing called shadow root. And then it says user agent because that's part of the browser. And I can actually move into that shadow root, and I can start to see that there are divs in here. Oh, that's cool. And I can get down to the controls. I could open up the controls. And I can see that we actually have some inputs, right? I have an input here for the button, which makes sense. I have an input type range for this range input. And this is all part of the Shadow DOM. I wasn't able to see any of this before. Shadow DOM is actually what's there, though. So that encapsulation is key. It's about hiding certain parts of the element that we don't want our consumers of the component to have to worry about. So again, we'll dive more into that for that Shadow DOM. Yeah, so the question was, all of those things were brought in just by including the video player. Those DOM nodes, yes. In fact, those were there, you just didn't see them before. But yeah, they were there. And those that's how the browser has decided to implement that element. Now, not all elements are implemented with Shadow DOM. And I don't know the exact process behind the browser deciding to do that with the video element. But in this case, those nodes were there. They utilized existing functionality. And they just hid those beneath a shadow node. So we'll go into a whole bunch of detail on the Shadow DOM. But yeah, that's something you can do now if you have Chrome. When I kind of gave versions of this presentation before, I would always say, like, make sure you have the latest version of Chrome, or make sure you have like the nightly version of Chrome. It's been out in Chrome in production in like the latest version for like a year now. So you don't have to worry about that. You definitely have it in the latest version of Chrome. And checking that box just means you can see the Shadow DOM. The Shadow DOM is supported before then. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So yeah, previously only possible in browser elements, any access to those APIs. But now we have access to this new API called Create Shadow Root, and we can use that. All right, the next piece is custom elements. Custom elements are the ability to create your own HTML elements. We demoed earlier today that if we create a custom HTML element and just like name it whatever we want, it's just an HTML unknown element. We can't really do anything with it. Custom elements allows us to create our own elements with this new function called document.registerElement. So it's a register element function on the document object. And it takes two key parameters, the name of our element. We actually have to have a dash in the name. And then the second object is just an options object, but the important piece is a prototype. Because here we can pass in the prototype that we want for our own element. In this case, I'm passing HTML element.prototype directly. So I'm passing the kind of the base element for all HTML elements, and I can build off of that. Again, we'll dive into all the possibilities here. But these are custom elements, and it means that now I can use something like this in my page, and that's a completely valid use at that point. You've registered your element on the page, and now you're going to go ahead and use it. All right, then we have HTML templates. HTML templates are the one piece of the web components family that have been around for a while. They are actually implemented in some other browsers, Firefox, I believe, and perhaps Safari. But templates are it's a new HTML element template to create inert selections of HTML. And by inert, I mean nothing happens within those. They're not rendered, nothing is downloaded, etc. So we only activate them when we need them. We use them as sort of blueprints for the rest of our application, for the rest of our components.
Where did we see templates? We already saw this with Ray. We saw the JavaScript text/template, not an HTML one.
Cool. Yeah, we will talk about different methods for including templates. And templates are big. Templates is, again, one of those like generic terms that I'm kind of frustrated at like is being used for this, because this is a very specific use of templates. Templates are something that we've been doing for a long time in terms of creating some sort of blueprint for building out components or applications. Basically, like, this is what I want my components to look like. Now go ahead and make those components later on. So templates really give us, the template tag gives us a way to transport that inert HTML. It doesn't do things like string replacement like you would see with some like underscore or handlebars templates, if you've seen those. And we'll talk more about those when we dive into templates. And the last piece of web components are HTML imports. And HTML imports give us link tags for HTML. So when we talk about portability for HTML, this is something we had with CSS and something we had with JavaScript, but we didn't have with HTML. With HTML imports, it means you can have this link element, and you can then import an HTML document. The key is just setting rel import rather than rel style sheet, which you would do with CSS. And then it will import HTML documents into your application. And so that's how you can create a package for your component and then import it into your page. All right, so I'm not going to go into a whole bunch of detail on this because I wanted to give you a chance to go ahead and create a web component before we leave today and start to see how that works and how everything fits together. I know we haven't dove into each one of them. That's what tomorrow and Wednesday will be for, is really dive into each of these APIs and figure out how they work. For now, I've kind of set up most of the scaffolding for you. So if you open up this exercise, we can create our own component here. So inside this directory, I have an index file and my first web component. If I open up my first web component, I have a few things going on here. I have first this template tag at the top and an ID. Within template, I have a style tag, so I can put CSS in there. And then below the style, you can put any HTML you want. Try putting anything here for now. Maybe go ahead and pull your badge if you have your hello badge working. Go ahead and put that in here and put your style in here for that hello badge as well. And then we have our script. So this is what's going to handle all those APIs that I mentioned in the slides, the creating of the element, the registering of the element, the creating of the shadow root. I'll walk it through really quickly. I just created a function called createElement. It's taking 3 arguments, one for a tag name, one for a template ID, and one for the base prototype. I set my base prototype to be either the one that I passed in or HTML element.prototype, which is the default. Then I set my template to be, ignore this part, just look at document.getElement by ID, and I pass in that ID. And then I get the content for that template. This stuff we'll go over later, but it's how we import from a document outside of our main document because I'm importing this via HTML imports. So the next line 12 here, is my custom element prototype. And you can think of this as the JavaScript object for which all my custom elements will be based. So it starts with object.create HTML element prototype. So that's going to be the start. I could just leave it there, but that's no fun. It doesn't do anything. And so then I want to go ahead and create my own method on it. I'm going to create a method called createdCallback. This is actually a function that's going to be called under the hood when my element is created. I'm going to, on line 14 here, create a shadow root, this.createShadowRoot. Going to say clone, which is going to import my template node. That's going to activate my template. And then I'm going to call shadowRoot, which is that element that I just created for my shadow root, and I'm going to append child clone. Don't worry if this doesn't make any sense, if it's really crazy. We're going to dive into how this all works throughout the week, and we'll get a better understanding of how this all fits together. For now, just use the functions that's here, play around with it a bit, and see how it works, in the browser. Line 18 is the key here. We're returning the element directly. Document.register element, which is how I create my custom element. I'm using that tag name that I passed in. And then I'm passing in that prototype that I've already created. The only thing you have to do here, I left the fun part for you, is that line 22, initialize your component here. So you're just going to call this function, which I put globally, so you can just write create element. You're going to pass in a tag name. You're going to pass in a template ID, which, if you go up here, is going to be template. And then you're going to, you don't actually have to pass in anything else because you don't need a base prototype because the HTML element by default. So you're going to call custom element, name it whatever you'd like, or call create element, sorry, name it whatever you'd like. I'm going to go back to the directory here for Hello World Web Components, and there's an index. In index here, I've already set up your HTML import for you. So I have rel equals import. That's how I know it's an HTML import as opposed to something for a style sheet. I have href, and I'm pointing to that HTML document that we just modified. There's this empty style here. you can add styles here and see how they work. One of the things you'll notice is that the styles here are outside of your shadow DOM, whereas the styles in your component are inside your shadow DOM. Again, don't worry too much about what that means, but give it a shot and see how those styles work out in terms of how you can modify your component. And then line 12 to 14, that's where you're going to go ahead and put your custom tag. So you can use the my custom element or whatever you've named it. You can name it whatever you'd like. Don't be constrained by the sort of boring name, my first web component. Pick whatever you'd want because it's your web component. And just put it there like you would any other tag. Open it up in Chrome, and voila, there's your web component. So I'll be around to